Detroit. You are watching In Session on WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest station in the world, and we are streaming live on Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, and Twitter. Please like, share, subscribe, and follow. And we are this session is we're going to be talking about environmental trauma. We talked about it in the past, but we're bringing our guests back. Marvin Williams will be joining us. I think he is already on the line, but you are here with Dr. T and Dr. Fishta, and we are so glad that you joined us this evening. You could have been anywhere, but you decided to be with us.
Well, we're better to be on this rainy Thursday.
Exactly. Here in Detroit and Michigan, it's rainy weather here, so hopefully you're in somewhere nice and warm, maybe drinking a nice hot tea or whatever you like. to
And
drink.
this trauma topic, Dr. T, it's just been signified by latest events, right?
Yes.
With our military folks, with environmental factors, family, childhood, and we understanding more and more about the effects that it has on people later in life, particularly, right? Because
Exactly.
often, as Marvin will tell us, and he states in his book, that we use certain ways to cope, right? Which could be unhealthy and lead into all kinds of life problems,
Right.
as we will see. So
Right.
I'm excited to have him back on the show again, and he's excellent.
Yes, he is. So let me. Do we have a caller on the line? Okay. So anywho, when we're talking about trauma, people mostly think of those traumas like a car accident, or we know that physical, psychological, emotional abuse goes on, but we don't talk about environmental trauma, meaning the world even in which we live in.
Yep.
The trauma that we even see through the media by just watching television,
Yep.
you know,
Or secondary trauma, as it's
exactly,
called. Yep.
exactly. And living in environments that may be underserved, where there's not enough grocery stores, there's a lot of maybe violence in the
Yep.
community. So we don't think about those type of traumas. But today we're going to talk about that when Marvin calls in. And do you have a PSA for us? While it's still early, get that out the way.
Yes, as we battle COVID-19 pandemic, it's clear that misinformation can be just as deadly as the awful virus and spread just as quickly. Myths are spreading on the internet and social media, so it's important to know the facts to keep our community healthy. The vaccines offered through Wayne County Public Health are scientifically proven to be safe. It is important that each one of us get the vaccine scheduled as soon as one is able to. In order to do so, visit waynecounty.com/COVID-19. Again, it is all one word, waynecounty.com/COVID-19 to get the latest information.
Yes. So, if you haven't been vaccinated, get vaccinated. I know that some people need it more than others, especially if you have underlying health issues. Go out and get the vaccine. I've talked to people who've actually had COVID and talked about all the distress and the
Talking about
pain.
that, I was very impressed with the city of Detroit and Mayor Morgan,
The-
Duggan, Morgan, Mayor Duggan yesterday announced that he will actually pay $50 for every person who drives someone for a vaccine, and you can have up to 3 people in one trip. Hence, you collect $150 to take your neighbors, relatives, friends, and those who can drive. Now,
So
if
that may be a driving factor for some people to be a driver.
That's correct. But
Yeah.
now, if I have my cousin who wants the vaccine, I might as well just drive him and
Right,
make my $50,
exactly.
even if he has the car, right? So, but what a good incentive, though, to get people to actually reach out to others if they don't have transportation, or at least a conversation to be had about the vaccine and encouraging people to
Absolutely.
get vaccines, as we know, particularly in Black community, that many people are not actually getting the vaccine,
Yeah, and we
which
know why. Well, we're talking about trauma because, historically, the black community has been targeted. for experiments. We
Correct.
have the
Correct.
Tuskegee
Yep.
experiment. We have other experiments, and people have still been impacted by that for generations.
Well, and you have those studies that you're referring to, Dr. T, and I think most importantly, you have the distrust of the
Exactly.
authority and the government, so to speak, right? Which is plays a major part in this whole pandemic we're in. And again, we went in with disparities in place, which we saw the death rates, right? The mortality rates higher in black communities.
Right.
And now here we are, where I think we can see light at the end of the tunnel, and still you have those disparity struggles, simply even as not trusting the system for obviously one logically can say valid reasons, so to
Right.
speak. So
I'm listening to you, Dr.
okay, all right. So today, trauma, our main topic.
Keep it
and
personal. We can keep it an intimate, nice conversation. I just had to grab something really quick. So I'm gonna hopefully.
Now, Marvin has an interesting story because he experienced trauma as a child, and he, on his book, he talks about personal experiences, which I do believe can relate to so many people out there, because oftentimes we struggle to understand what is trauma. Is it one big traumatic event that makes trauma be trauma from a clinical point of view, or is it a series of events that can lead to trauma? And obviously we know can be both. And oftentimes, like you mentioned earlier, people think of trauma as some form of accident taking place, something major, some sexual assault, but that's not always the case, right? Because you have, as we mentioned, secondary trauma. You have a series of milder or lesser traumatic events that over time they can amount to emotional problems, so to speak. And identifying those can be helpful because it helps in addressing them, in treating them, either be medication or either be through therapy and counseling, so to speak.
Absolutely. I was literally talking to a woman today. She's in probably her late 60s, and she also has written a book about her life, her trauma over her lifetime. So sometimes we're so busy living our life that we don't even process that we've been through a traumatic event, and we just go through life, and we have sometimes thoughts that are not clear. We don't focus very well. We may be irritable with people, and we're walking around with all these behaviors and emotions, and not realizing that it's because of the trauma that we experience. And some people even have forgotten, like if they had trauma when they're a child, and say you were traumatized when you were maybe 3 to 8, 6 or something, and by the time you're 12 years old, you've forgotten that you've had those traumatic experiences, but you have already developed some behaviors. And you carry that with you, and you wonder why am I so angry, or why am I irritable?
And it's difficult to reach out for help, right? Because number one, do you actually recognize?
Exactly.
And number two, and even most importantly, instinctually, we run away from pain. We don't walk into pain, right?
Exactly.
And counseling and therapy is the hard work through trauma, actually, which often it can lead a person to having this mini re-traumatizing, so to speak, and experiencing these feelings that are not pleasant, right? But yet, in long term, can be very pleasant and help actually with relief from trauma.
Right. Marvin, do we have you on the line with us?
I am. I'm on the line.
How are you today?
I'm well. How are you guys?
I'm doing very well.
Hello from the great state of Michigan.
Hello, Doc. How are you?
Very good. And the wonderful city of Detroit.
How's the
Well,
weather
I'm calling
there?
you from sunny South Florida.
Yeah, we're kind of a little jealous that you're having. Well, are you having beautiful weather? Because we know sometimes it's not all that beautiful in Florida. It rains there too.
Absolutely gorgeous
Well,
right
it's
now.
beautiful here. It's sunny, 75 degrees, and we're all on a boat, Marvin.
Yeah, and Doctor
He's
Fish
not gonna
Dog.
let me win, right?
Yeah, he's delusional right now, everyone. So we're gonna get him checked. So.
It's healthy. It's good. Just thinking. Marvin, thank you so much for coming in our show again. We thoroughly enjoyed our conversation last time, your experience, and not only your personal experience related to trauma, but the fact that you wrote a book, which I think is amazing.
Hmm.
It's an honor to have you guys to have me again. I really appreciate you for reaching back out to me. Thank you.
So Marvin, tell our audience a little bit about yourself. Are you there?
Well, you the last time you asked me that question, I went into this dialogue, but these are questions that I would tense up about, and this is a long answer to telling you about myself. I used to tense up because most people will ask what you do in order to define who you are. And that used to puzzle me. But a little bit about me is now that I'm showing up to life, I'm showing up fighting the trauma that I was dealt with for so long in my life. So I'm just a guy just making sure that I do the best that I can do and uncoil and not blame anybody else from the situation that I got myself in, and how I move out is going to be an experience to help everyone else. That's who I am.
And that's part of the title of your book, Uncoiling My Corkscrew, correct?
Absolutely. That is the title of the book. Uncoiling My Courtship.
How did you come up with that title? Very interesting title. Just reminds me that I should be pouring a glass of wine and sitting back and relaxing. That's what it reminds me of. But that's not what the premise of the book is. But tell us how you came up with that title.
Well, probably from too much wine and and looking at the corkscrew one day, I realized that when you turn the corkscrew backwards, it actually goes forward to take the cork out.
Mm.
And in doing that, I realized I had to go backwards in my life in order to unwind the things that I've been going through in order to go forward. And that's how the title, The Corkscrew, spoke to me.
Yeah, very intriguing, Marvin, because breaking it down that way, it makes sense. And you're talking about, or let me ask you, are you referring to revisiting or visiting your trauma?
Absolutely, Doc. You have to. You have to look at yourself in the mirror and not blame your parents, your environment, or whatever has happened to you. Realizing that you are or you've been through trauma or are currently in trauma, but figure out a way to face it head on and stop blame shifting, but take control of your life yourself in order to move forward.
And Marvin, I'm interested to know, since you've opened up publicly about your trauma, at what point and how did you come to actually realize that there is trauma that's perhaps affecting you at that point?
Well, it's so many different instances, and growing up in the neighborhood as a black man we deal with so much pride, meaning that it's not manly to say you have problems. Suck it up and move on is what they tell a young boy. Suck it up and move on. Don't deal with that. But my move on, kind of crippled me because I know it wasn't normal, but what I was dealing with, but the toxicity had become so bad that we normalized toxicity in my neighborhood and in my home, quite frankly. So I started realizing early on that the things that I was dealing with growing up in my neighborhood, that it wasn't normal, but it also wasn't normal for me to talk about it. So at a certain point, I had to come real with myself, regardless if I was going to stick out like a sore thumb or if others were going to be hurt by me sharing my story. I had to bear the brunt of that and say, I need to go forward anyways because I need to live. In order for me to live, these things have to die, and I have to face it. So that's what I started to do, little by little. But the situation when I ended up in rehab, I came face forward, and I said, you know what? This is it. This is it. This is time for me to, look at myself and undig these things that I kind of suppressed for so long and kind of just share it with the world.
You're watching In Session on WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest station in the world, streaming live on Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, and Twitter. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to join the conversation, please call 313 355 6018.
Correct. Also, as we battle COVID-19 pandemic, it is clear that misinformation can be just as deadly as the awful virus and spread just as quickly. Myths are spreading on the internet and social media, so it is important to know the facts to keep our community healthy. The vaccines offered through Wayne County Public Health are scientifically proven to be safe. It is also important that each one of us get the vaccine scheduled as soon as we are able to. In order to do so, visit waynecounty.com/COVID-19 to get the latest information.
And you're back with In Session, and we are talking about environmental trauma with Marvin Williams from Boca Raton, Florida. Enjoying that nice, beautiful weather while we have this dreary weather here. But you were talking about the trauma from childhood. Would you care to share with us some of the things that you experienced during your childhood that you consider traumatizing?
Well, having a parent or parents on substances in a single parent home is really traumatizing. At the fact that you get jealous when you see two parents with a child. And I realized early on that there was a yearning for me to have my father in the home, but he wasn't there. And it hurt me pretty much all the time. So that was one experience that I can say, and I can talk about that led to so many other different experiences. But that's just one that stick out that kind of led me in a rabbit trail of other traumas.
And I know at one point, did you live with your grandmother?
I did. At 3 years old, my mom was out and she came back home to an empty nest. She said I wandered off and went to my grandmother's house. And my grandmother took me in and said at that point she knew that it was her mission to raise me because in her words she said, something special about you. And I felt that God led you here in the middle of the night to my home. And that's how I got with my grandmother.
Okay.
How about also, Marvin, talking about the environment, and I believe you did grow up in the city of Detroit?
No.
Okay.
Not Detroit, my friend. But I grew up in the area, you can say Detroit, Chicago, Miami, Florida, Indiantown, all of it, if it has a hood across the tracks, it kind of look alike. It's just alike. Different cities, same thing goes on. The poverty, the different things, the drugs, the gang violence, all of that goes on in the same areas in different cities.
And if any, what impact, looking back now, Marvin, would that have had on you?
Oh, tons. I mean, I think I remember when I was younger, when the crack epidemic hit our neighborhood and seeing people that I just never thought I would see go down that road and staring in their faces and realizing that they were different people, that they weren't the same. It scared me. And I also realized that I realized that those things that they're, the drugs that they were doing weren't normal. Not that any drugs are normal, but just to see them from a civilized place, going to work from 9 to 5 or whatever, and then to see them on the streets eating out of trash and different things like that, it's just not normal. And I saw many of my friends' parents, my parents, through the same thing. So it stunned me, and it stunted my growth.
Mm. And there's studies that or not really studies, but one thing that's not talked about is sexual abuse that happens in homes. Were you Did you experience any form of, I mean, not that emotional abuse and psychological abuse is
Yeah,
not any worse, but did you go through any physical or sexual abuse? I think you talk a little bit about it in your book.
I do. I give reference to it because I don't bring up anyone because I've totally forgiven whoever it was. But absolutely, the waking up, being touched, um, you know, put into practice doing these things. So sexually, yes, and physically, mentally, verbally abused. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I want to thank you as well as applaud you for having the strength and courage to even talk about something so traumatic. Most often, our men don't talk about these experiences, and I think it really stunts our men, their growth.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that? How has
Well,
this freed you, or has it not freed you?
well, we're so prideful,
Hmm.
and being a black man, that's all you have. It seems at a certain point. But at the end of the day, that's all you're going to be left with because you're empty inside, hiding those pains. So I needed to the demon, the monster that was inside of me screaming to get out. I had to let him out. And like I started the show, and if it hurt other people, it did, but it freed me.
Right.
And it takes a lot to stand up in the face of that because you know you're going to hurt some people's feelings. You know you're going to stick out like a sore thumb. But at the end of the day, you have to do your best to be your best. And I
Absolutely.
had to face it.
Absolutely. And there are ramifications to family members for this, because I don't even think that some things don't even have a statute of limitation on them. So,
Right,
Depending on
right,
what state you're in, and yeah,
exactly.
yeah. And
right.
also, Marvin, kind of moving up from there, you talk very in depth about coping mechanisms, like sex and alcohol and drugs, and even running into relationships as a self-medication, medicating way of doing it. Tell us about that. What do you write about there?
Well, I knew I wasn't going to sit on anyone's couch and be picked on or being called loony for doing that. But there's so many different things, drugs, alcohol. I drink a lot to numb the pain that I was going through.
Mm,
The alcohol I found out was just a symptom. The pain and the trauma that I was dealing with was the absolute problem. So sex would often be a thing that I turned to in order not to turn inside and deal with the things that I needed to deal with. And at the cost of hurting others,
mhm.
I still did it because it lessened the pain for me at the moment.
Right.
But it a trickle effect on this person that I'm now intertwined with that I have to try to break up with also. So like I wrote in the book, it's horrible the weave we web. In trying to get out of these things, we find ourselves bringing others in with us. And that's the traumatic experiences that I've had so many different times trying to get out. With alcohol, the drinking and driving, and the sex, and not wanting the person and hurting them. It's terrible. It's terrible. So those are the things I had to look at myself and say, Marv, this ain't right. This
Right.
ain't right. You need to get yourself together, dude.
Right.
And I called myself out, and I did it, and
Yeah.
I'm still doing it.
Yeah, because what I'm hearing are a lot of risky behaviors that you were engaging in, and while you were self medicating, you were also self harming.
Well, I'm an illusion. I'm not living real life.
Mm,
It's not real to me. The real thing is trying to come out of me so I can face it and live. But all the other things, I didn't even take it as risky behavior. It was normal behavior. Because if you look right now in the neighborhood that I grew up in, and it's normal behavior because we won't face ourselves and deal with ourselves. So it's not even classified as risky. Yes, it's risky, but in the mindset that you're in at that moment, it's just behavior. It's just something that you do.
So even now, it sounds like you have to reconceptualize everything that you were taught and even defining what is healthy and unhealthy behaviors. Because of all those things that you mentioned and you say that are actually normal within the community are actually, it's not normal.
It's not. It's
Yeah.
not.
So even our perception in certain communities, and I'm going to really talk about minority communities because these are the communities that are most impacted by poverty, drugs, um, and violence. Um, so we have to even look at what do we consider normal? Why do we say that these behaviors are normal? And then when society actually looks and we look in the media and everything that we see on TV says that it's not normal.
Yep.
However, we still have this false illusion that it is normal because it's happening every single day in the neighborhood. So if it's happening every day and you wake up and go to sleep to the same thing, then yes, it does become normal.
Yep. Which
It
again,
does.
at the end of the day, is not and can have just tremendous negative impact. And you're not only looking at that person; you're looking at the whole community now. You're looking at generational
Yes.
problem, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
And you have,
Yes.
however we got there, but you're looking at the segregation of a group of people here, Illinois, Detroit, South Chicago, and others, right? And
All of
I
that.
think it's a systematic problem that
Absolutely.
obviously we know what the problem is, but still far from solved.
Yeah, we do.
Right.
Yeah, we do. And we talked about that a little bit the last time.
Yeah,
Not to
we
cut you off.
did.
I remember that.
Right, and we probably go into it. The conversation will probably lead there eventually.
I mean, what gives me chills is you have a child growing that they learn and they think that the only way you can have $1 is if you sell a dime and a nickel at the corner, right?
Exactly.
And everyone is doing it. Who's doing more or less, and how do you run if you get in trouble? That's the way one grows up. Now the question is, how can you help someone get out of that kind of cycle?
When
right?
they don't see anything different.
That's correct.
Except for
Well,
on the television screen. So let me ask you, Marvin, when you were a child, you're growing up, because we really don't look at children and how trauma really impacts them. Coming up
right.
as a young man, being impacted by trauma, how did that impact you in coming up, going to school, connecting with other people? How were you able to navigate that?
I pretty much isolated or hid inside of sports. And most of us do. We're gifted in sports, but that shouldn't be it. So usually if myself, I hid in sports and I usually found myself by myself reflecting on how to be better than I was. My answer is I'm just chosen. I can't. It's nothing that I did or put together, but my thoughts have always been forward thinking, and I didn't do that for myself. But I started recognizing that I needed to answer to what was calling me to a greater place, and in doing that, I had some unique people around me. Specifically my uncle. He gave me a different worldview. And I think that's what it is. You have to get outside of that worldview that they give us inside of those railroad tracks in that box area. We have to change our worldview. And he used to take me to different places, different islands, looking at mansions and different things like that, and told me that I can have that. And that resonated, and it started planting a seed inside of me. And now I'm questioning, how can I get it? And not only that, when he took me to different restaurants, not McDonald's, not Burger King, he took me to different restaurants, and he said, you can't order a burger. So he started planning these things that I thought was so far away from me. He started making those things my norm. So I personally think if he wasn't there and different others, that I would have been stuck in that box, just like so many of them are stuck now.
Okay. You are watching In Session on WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest station in the world, streaming live on Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, and Twitter. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, as well as follow.
Okay, so I'm gonna summarize my part here. Get your vaccine. Get your vaccine.
Wayne County, though.
Yep.
Wayne County.
Marvin, here is, I get chills when I hear you talk, okay? Because fortunately you had someone who showed you something different. So your norm became questionable at that point, right? And there's so many who don't. And I don't know if you saw the State of the Union address last night and so forth. We're talking about helping families, helping the poor, right?
Absolutely.
Because no one lives in an island. We have just segregated these neighborhoods, but we're all a part of that, and they're a part of us, whichever way you look at it. Now, here's, and I can talk about the system. I get heated up, Marvin, and listeners. You have
we don't want to get Dr. Fisher revved up because nobody knows he's actually a rebel.
We actually have this fear of socialism that see it as this something bad to actually help that single mother with 2 children.
That's
like
because
take Marvin, right?
Right.
Take Marvin. If he would have had some meaningful help, life could be different for many, many Marvins out there, right? Yet we spend more money than any other modern and wealthy country
on war.
And guess what? We got a major problem here because we are too proud to look at Canada, Finland, Germany, Norway, and I can go on and on and on and on about the better life than we have for most people in this country. Yet we are the wealthiest. Yet
because we're a capitalist society. So of
course,
I mean, when you are a capitalist society, guess what? Everything is built and based on wealth. How much can I get? How much can I get from you? How can I take what you have?
Dr. T, you can be capitalist all day long because Switzerland is capitalist, but they have social systems for people that they can fall back on.
But that's like you were saying. We over here in the United States, where everyone from other countries want to come running to because of the liberties and freedoms that we have here. But
our population growth stagnated the last 10 years, and in part is because immigration has slowed down. So,
really, and why do you think that is?
Exactly. And
we're gonna have to have a whole nother show on that.
How many
that's a whole new can of worms.
How many mass shootings did we have within just last 30 days? It's disheartening. It's embarrassing. It's you call it what you want, right? How much trauma have we as a system created based on these simple, just last month's shooting, right?
Yeah.
We're talking thousands of people dead. And guess what? It's not Afghanistan. It's not some other country. It's right here around us.
And when I started going to school, and I did an interest inventory to see what career I wanted to go into, and the field of mental health. Back in, oh gosh, I'm about to date myself. Back in 1993.
3 years ago.
No, I want to say this because it's been almost 20 years ago. And in this book called The Occupational Handbook, it said back then that mental health would be one of the thriving professions. It was one of the top 10. Yep. And that was in 93.
We're top 3 now.
Yeah. So that tells you that there's been research done that's predicting a mental health crisis.
Correct.
That's going to be here in America, and we're in it.
Sure. Well, actually,
it's
worldwide.
Not only not predicting, but you're creating.
That's correct.
Let's talk about the creating of the mental health crisis.
Well, there's that. So that's an even bigger issue. So are we saying that there were systems put in place that made sure that we would have trauma and have the need for more people to be in the mental health profession. That's a whole
Absolutely.
another way to think of
Absolutely.
it.
Well, and again, it starts with education system, right? I mean,
Right.
look at the education. Just take city of Detroit, okay? And let's just take a suburban kid and a kid from Detroit. Listen, they're going in already with disparities when they take
Exactly.
standardized testing because they weren't actually well taught or good enough to get some scores that will get you into some
Exactly.
meaningful,
And
right?
and not just to mention that, because we know Detroit public schools have taken a hit. I'm graduated in 1991. When I graduated, our class was a class of over 500 students graduating. Now we don't even have barely 500 kids going to
Right.
school. And the
Right.
schools have closed. We have so many schools that have closed in the city of Detroit, which tells us what? You don't even want our little black children educated. You know?
And you talk
Well,
about trauma, right?
it's true. And I talk about in my book, and you just mentioned something about school. There's a science project that I was just so, like, I was so thrilled to do. But in order to get it done, I needed my parents to buy, my single mom to buy me the material. She couldn't. She couldn't afford it. So I carried my science project in a bag because I still wanted to get it done. But when I sat it on the table next to the kids that were across the track from me, it didn't look right. And it killed not only my dream, but it made me actually upset with my mom. But as I got older, I started realizing what the dynamics were and why she couldn't afford it at the time.
She had to make a choice, Marvin. Put food on table or buy you some science
Absolutely.
project. That,
Yep.
But
right?
as a child,
Correct.
you don't have the mental capacity to even think that
Sure.
way. So
Sure.
all little Marvin was thinking about is, I'm the only one that doesn't have the same things that my peers have economically. So now we're talking about how our economics situation can
Sure.
even cause trauma to a child, like it did with you, Marvin. You had to bring your project to school in a bag, and that affected your self-esteem.
Yet we have
Absolutely.
a problem helping a
Absolutely.
mother with 2, 3, or 4 children, right? As a society. Think about
Yes.
what we're doing to our own future, because who's going to take care of us, me and you,
Exactly.
right here, right now, right?
Exactly.
So
Right.
it's a systems issue, Marvin, and we're very happy to have you with you as the author of a wonderful book. Also, let's talk a bit about ways to treat this trauma, Marvin. In your personal case and in your knowledge, how does one identify it, number one, and even begin in those first steps of starting to have the conversation and knowing that there is a problem?
Right. So are we talking about forgiveness and like you said, Marvin, breaking up with the old you?
And let's talk to even
Absolutely.
those who actually don't have the uncle that you fortunately had, Marvin.
We just threw a lot at you.
Well,
You got it? Did you catch all that?
Dissect it yourself, Marvin. It's all yours.
I did.
Do what you want with
I
it.
did. So,
You're
well,
in a sunny
the
state.
thing is,
We're not worried about you.
Right,
Go
right,
ahead.
right.
well, personally, I realized that I was an athlete and I could overcome some things. I can overcome some battles, but there was this personal thing that I kind of kept quiet about because I developed, attention deficit disorder, but nobody really knew. I couldn't be still can't, but I would skip class because I didn't want to be fidgety and moving all around in school. And it started, actually, I missed over 75 days my freshman school year,
Wow.
because personally, because my grandfather died, I lost him, I lost my hero, and it traumatized me, obviously. And I needed help to start dealing with those type of things mentally. Things that's on the outside of me, I could kind of maneuver, but inside of me like that, I had to really seek some type of help. So I started talking to someone secretly about it that I could trust. And I was enamored. My uncle studied psychology, and he was one of my heroes. And I would read his books that he would bring home and try to find out, what I was dealing with. I don't think he ever knew it because I didn't want to share it with him because it would show that I was weak. Even though I think I could have been with him, but I say all that to say this. You have to find someone that you can trust, someone that you can pour yourself out to and know that they won't judge you, that they will help you. So in doing that, you have to go backwards and lose your pride.
Well, before
You have to lose your ego.
before you go on, I just want to address something you said, because you said you didn't want your uncle to know because you didn't want him to know that you were weak.
Absolutely.
Tell us a little more about
Absolutely.
that. How did you come to determine that you being abused, or you coming from parents that were using substances, you being the victim, how did you get to the point that you were the weak one when you were actually the victim?
You don't see it as that. You're taught to be strong, whatever that may look like. You're taught to be strong. Don't carry those weaknesses. Anytime a boy used to get beat in my neighborhood, get a paddling or whatever you want to call it, suck it up. Don't cry. I wish I would see tears. So you're taught to hide your pain. Period. Right out the gate, you're taught. Boys don't cry. So if I cry, that means something is wrong with me.
Okay.
So I didn't want something wrong with me, so I hid all those things. So it's automatic. You're taught. And I think they're doing it in order to try to propel you forward past where they were. However, it cripples you because it don't allow you to deal with the things that you need to deal with in order to get past them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. To get to that that forgiveness component of it. And so let's move to that, the forgiveness stage. How have you gone through that stage, or how did you get to that point?
Well, that's a good question. I realized life wasn't happening and things wasn't happening to me, but they were happening for me. And I say that by saying this. I started realizing that, I have incredible faith in God. And I started realizing that he wasn't going to allow anything to harm me to the point of killing me.
Absolutely. Amen to that.
So I trusted him secretly in a way that this is going to help me to help somebody else. So I started trying to be other people's center and not just myself. Because in doing that, I take all that pressure off myself and realize that I need to care for other people. So for me to care for other people, that means I need to stop sleeping around. I need to stop lying. It was so much that I needed to do in order to stop doing that. So I stopped blaming my dad mostly and realized what he dealt with. Why was he the way he was? I tried to understand him versus judge him.
Wow.
And
That's a lot of courage.
Him,
Yeah, that's a lot of courage to even step outside of yourself and look at the person that hurt you and to see what trauma did they go through. How did they get to that person to where they're now hurting others, which goes back to that saying, hurt people hurt people. So
Absolutely.
We're seeing that. So it's really a cycle. When you have trauma, there's a cycle now. And here's where we're going with that generational trauma. Your father went through trauma, then you went through trauma. And then you're saying that to recover from it, you had to do some self-assessment and to forgive those people who hurt you. And you started with your father. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's where I needed to start because I felt that he was my hero and villain at the same time.
That's a real big conflict.
What was that?
I said that's a big conflict for your hero to also be your villain, but I actually understand that concept.
Yeah, he was, and then I started to realize that he was a mere man.
Mm.
If I was dealing with some of the things, I needed to understand what he was dealing with, and the things that he was teaching me. He'd been in this world 20 years before me, so after we rekindled, he had a story that I had to listen to that would help me in order to, not go in that ditch that he went into.
Hmm.
So
Really quick,
even
Marvin.
those little things help me. Sure.
Really quick. You're watching In Session on WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest station in the world, streaming live on Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, and Twitter. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe.
Go on, Marvin.
Yeah, in order, and this is what I was doing with my dad. I was holding him at a higher bar than I was holding myself. I was deflecting everything. Although he had hurt me and he wasn't there, I still had to have responsibility for myself at a certain point. I couldn't drink poison and expect him to die my whole life.
Right.
What age are you referring to, Marvin? At what? How old are you at this point?
I started thinking about it probably at age 19, 20.
Okay.
But it took so long for me to actually forgive him. I thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got in more trouble, I blamed him. So I needed to take responsibility for my own life. And I'm still doing it because I still find some areas that I look at and say, wow, that hurts. But I don't run from them now. I don't drink over it. I look at it and I deal with it. And now I can call my dad and say, Dad, this happened. I was feeling this way. And he's like, yeah, let's talk about it. And I can have a conversation with him now.
Isn't that nice?
Yep. Very,
it's
very nice.
Beautiful. It's beautiful. I'm in the best place that I've ever been. I get emotional.
Yeah. And sometimes when we don't have our parents when we are young, and even though they may be in our life and out of our life at the same time, as we get older, we still want those relationships. We still crave that parent, that child inside of us still craves that parent and that nurturing that we needed or didn't get from them during that time. And even as an adult, you will search and seek that from your parent. And I'm so
Absolutely.
glad that you were able to get that from your father. He was able to pour back into you what you were missing and to fill that gap.
Mm-hmm.
Marvin, go ahead.
Yes. No, go ahead. I'm listening.
Yeah, at some point we want you to talk to our listeners, either young or not, someone who finds themselves or suspects someone else in some environmental trauma, either past or current. Give us some words of wisdom, so to speak.
Or encouragement, yeah.
Just tell us, what would you tell them?
Or what would you even tell little Marvin?
I would tell little Marvin inside of me that you have to find somebody that you trust. And when you find that person that you trust and you let go of the things that you feel that you blame yourself for, it's not your fault. I tell Marvin all the time, the little Marvin inside of me, it's not your fault. But take responsibility now once you give it to somebody and learn how to deal with the things that you've been through. And it's okay to not be okay. It's okay. But it's not okay to stay where you are. And I tell myself that all the time because I find myself sometimes in places that I don't want to be, inside mentally. But it's okay not to feel that pain. But it's not okay to stay there. And if you can get up outside of that pain and realize that things can be better for you tomorrow, and then you begin to make consecutive days that things are better, then it becomes a lifestyle. But it starts with that forgiving yourself first and releasing yourself first. And then down the line, whoever hurt you, you have to find a way to forgive them.
Very, very good and powerful, Marvin. And you know, you're onto something there. Obviously, there's research, actually, a body of research that tells us that when a child, particularly adolescent, has someone to talk to that they trust, they do actually better emotionally later in life, which I think it lines up with your story there, Marvin. That fortunately you had your uncle that started opening your eyes and you kind of took off from there.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm so grateful for him. He was my stand-in, and he still is. But I tell you, I'm my best because I really have a great relationship with my dad today, and it's amazing. I'm amazed today the relationship me and my dad have.
And you know, Marvin, I assume in this world of emotional pain that we described today, the fact that you actually have a good relationship with your dad is not only you that are positively being affected by this. I assume your dad has to be humbled and happy about it.
Yeah, I write about in the book real quick that I always set up in my house, even when my mom didn't know. I always looked at the door and wanted my dad to come by every Christmas. I would get an extra plate silently, thinking my dad was going to come by. And I get to call him every day and experience that Christmas that I wanted back then
Hmm.
because he shows up.
That's beautiful. That's a beautiful story and a beautiful ending. Now, how's the relationship with you and your mother?
Amazing. Me and my mom are in a good place. We've been. I have to say this. My mom misdirected her anger at me because I was the closest thing to my dad.
Sure,
Mm.
sure.
And I realized that early on that she wasn't mad at me. She was mad at the man that my namesake, the same name, that hurt her. And I was the closest thing to her that reminded her of him. And it was misdirect anger. So I've forgiven my mom. I don't look at her in that way because she was left with me and then my younger brother by herself. She did the best she could.
Yeah, that's a great way to conceptualize that, Marvin, because what's the alternative, right? And
Right.
sounds like you've come a long way and made not only your life different and in much better place, but those around you as well.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
clearly,
I really appreciate it.
for those who read your book and hear the story here,
Uncorking My Corkscrew, and it is available. Well, actually, Marvin, you tell the people where they can get your book.
I'm calling my corkscrew. It's available at Amazon, Walmart, Target, Barnes and Noble, anywhere. Just look it up. I'm calling my corkscrew, Marvin Williams. It is available.
And we're having an author showcase here in Detroit on Friday, June the 18th from 4 to 8 p.m. And will you be one of our vendors? I know we talked about this, so I'm putting you on the spot. Are you going to be one of the
No.
vendors?
Of course, I would definitely be there because I really appreciate both of you for having me on and believing in the work that I do. So I thank both of you from the bottom of my heart. So I definitely will be there.
we truly appreciate you for taking the time, Marvin. And don't forget, June is just as beautiful as Florida in wintertime here in Michigan.
But you have to re-listen to what he just said to make sure you caught it.
I caught it.
Okay,
I caught it.
I'm
And
sure
I'm going
you
to
did,
see.
yes.
I'm going to see.
Well, we want to actually thank you for coming and being our guest and really talking to our audience about environmental trauma, how it impacts children and even into adulthood, and how to overcome such trauma. And you've been very candid in this conversation, and sometimes that's hard, but you were I don't even know the words to say to even express my
Well,
gratitude for you coming and sharing with us and our audience your experience.
Nothing like first-hand experience, Marvin. We can talk clinically, use jargon all day long, but this is what I think hits the target.
Exactly. Well, we want to thank everyone for joining us and watching In Session on WJZZ Cool TV. Tune in next Thursday from 5 to 6 p.m.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.